All right. So I want to say first and foremost, good morning and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining Facilitating Virtual Training That Doesn't Suck. Um, Let me get my slides up. There we go. All right. So like to start out with just a quick little kind of snippet of a story as we get started here. So I'd like for everyone for a moment to jump into the time machine and travel back to 2020. Not all that far back, right? But as we all know, that's when the world shut down, right, due to COVID. And quite literally everyone who was doing training had to go virtual, whether it was something they were familiar with or not. And let's be perfectly honest, probably somewhere between 95 and 98% of people who had to do that, frankly, had no clue how to do that, right? So people oftentimes thought that they could take their in-person content, just jump on Zoom and deliver exactly the same way that they always did and expected to get the same result, right? So you would join a Zoom meeting or training, right? The facilitator sometimes would be off camera, or if they were on camera, it was completely out of frame. And so it looked kind of funny. Their audio sometimes would come through as grainy or garbled, or maybe it even sounded like they were talking through a fishbowl, right? No one really knew how to use any of the platform features. And let's be honest, it really created a poor experience for people. So, what would happen is your participants would get sometimes frustrated or bored or even distracted, right? And then they would leave and ultimately not take away what it is that you intended for them to. So, fast forward back to today, some people have actually become really, really good at virtual facilitation, right? They check all of the boxes. But the harsh reality is that some people still suck. And they're making some of those same mistakes that were being made early in that journey, that process. And it's not because they don't want to do a great job, but rather they don't know what they don't know, right? So that's what we're going to be covering today is really some of the basic blocking and tackling of virtual facilitation. We're going to talk a little bit about the doing as well as the being of virtual facilitation. Okay. So first and foremost, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm the owner of Insignia Training Partners. My name is Bernie DeSantis, and Insignia is a full service learning and development company that provides outsourced, or the new word is fractional, support for training strategy, design, development, and deployment. My co-facilitator today is Marc Stoecker, and I will pass it over to him briefly to introduce himself.
Hi, folks. Thank you, Bernie, for the introduction. So I design, develop, and facilitate workshops and training in person and virtually. I'm also a certified coach, primarily helping people with their business life, their personal life, and mental fitness. And I also love creating creative brainstorming and problem solving with clients through my company, Prism of Purpose Coaching and Training. Back to you, Bernie.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'd also like to introduce Joey. He is going to be our producer today. So he will be managing our logistics. And of course, if you have any technical issues today, please be sure to reach out to him directly using the chat.
Thank you, brother.
Now, absolutely, brother. So as it pertains to the training today, I personally started my career as a leadership development trainer at Quicken Loans a little over 20 years ago. And my main focus there was in experiential learning. And what that basically means for those of you who aren't familiar with the terminology, it's basically creating engagement and immersion through activities and games, and then a follow-up debrief to really explore what those activities meant as it pertained to the subject matter. So, again, obviously, since the beginning of COVID, when the world shut down, Insignia Training Partners has helped companies both large and small to deliver well over 5,000 engaging virtual training courses, workshops, and webinars. Some of our clients include EY, Johnson & Johnson, and McKinsey, just to name a few blue chips, along with some smaller boutique firms like Gerard Trading Solutions, the Trusted Advisor Associates, and the Get Real Project. Now, I have to say this. I've seen a lot. I've experienced a lot of virtual training. Again, some of it good, but a lot of it has been really, really bad. I've coached a lot of those facilitators on how to show up in Zoom, how to leverage the platform. And believe it or not, I still get clients who have never set up and run a Zoom meeting, right? Still it happens today. And the truth is that you don't really need to be a trained trainer in order to get great engagement and positive results from your virtual training. Assuming, of course, that you do have good content, you're able to deliver appropriately. Really, you just need to show up properly on camera. You have to have good audio, and you need to understand how to leverage the tool, the platform that we're using today, particularly Zoom, but there are so many platforms that are out there. You have Teams, you have WebEx, you have Adobe Connect, you have Google Meet, and then there's a plethora of new platforms that are coming out every single day. So let's hop into some content. So our objective today is really a onefold, right? We want to identify virtual facilitation best practices using the engagement features here within the tool that we're using, along with some mindset tools that you can implement immediately into your next virtual event in order to make it that much more engaging for your participants. Let's be honest, people don't really want to just see a talking head on screen anymore. We've really gone beyond that. All right, so setting the tone. This is an important piece when we're talking about virtual facilitation. We want us to lay the groundwork for people, right? So people understand how they participate and what the expectations are. So we have things like participate and interact. Be sure that you're using your camera and the platform features. So if those of you who are off camera, if you wouldn't mind coming on, obviously we'd love to have you and see your face. If it's a matter of you have too much going on behind you, I understand, and feel free to remain off camera. Number two, be sure to share your knowledge, experience, and best practices. We'd love to hear from you if there is something that we don't cover, because we can all get better every single time that we deliver. Kind of the old Vegas rule, right? What happens here stays here. Unless it's really, really good, then obviously you can go ahead and share that with the world, because we'd love for people to know about it. Be sure to show respect for others. And number five, which I think is really, really important, avoid distractions. So what I'd like for you guys to do now is, if you would, please drop into the chat the number of the expectation there that you feel is most important for you in this training today. I'll give you a moment to go ahead and do that. All right, Kate says number one, participate. Sajal, number four, show respect. Fantastic. Joe, one, participate. Excellent. Bruce, five, avoiding distractions. Noel, two, share your knowledge. Love it. Shakina, one, participate and interact. Awesome. Thank you very much for your participation with that. Now, I want to really quickly speak on distractions, okay? And I'm going to ask a question. It's somewhat rhetorical, but I do want to know the answer. How many of you are working from more than one monitor today? Okay. See a couple of you raising your hands. Very good. Okay. I'm personally working from 7 monitors. So there is plenty of things that could potentially distract me if I were in your shoes as a participant. Now, obviously, those of you who didn't raise your hand, you're working with only one. Now, if you are facilitating, I highly, highly recommend that you get a second monitor, even a small portable monitor, one that you can kind of plug and play, because it makes a huge, huge difference when you're facilitating. Trying to share a deck and run your meeting from one monitor is actually exceptionally hard. So highly, highly recommend pop onto Amazon, get one of those portable monitors you can plug and play for the opportunities when you have facilitation to do. Okay. All right. So our agenda today, we're going to share some best practices. I'm going to show you a funny clip, or at least one that I find funny. We're going to talk a little bit about how you leverage the virtual platform. I'm going to pass it over to Mark, and he's going to talk a little bit more about the doing and being of virtual facilitation, and then we'll have a quick wrap up. We are scheduled for 90 minutes today, but we don't expect that we're going to take the entire time, so we will likely give you a few minutes back towards the end of our session. All right, and now to get us kicked off, we are going to start with a polling question. So if you could launch that. The polling question is, what level of confidence do you have in your ability to facilitate virtual courses? All right. Here they come rolling in. All right. So a lot of you are in high confidence. Very good. I see 4 in high confidence, 2 in medium, and 1 in low confidence. Okay. So my goal today is obviously to get the one who is a little bit lower in confidence, get you at least to a moderate. Those of you who are moderate, hopefully we can get you into high. And those of you who have a high confidence, hopefully we can at very least give you a couple of additional best practices that you can walk away with. Okay. All right. So moving on. Our next participation opportunity. I'd like to talk a little bit about what it is that you feel or you've experienced or witnessed that has made a virtual training bad in your eyes. What are some of those things that you have witnessed or experienced that made a virtual training bad? So Bruce says bad camera angle. Absolutely. Tech issues, Sajal. Yep, 100%. Pure lecture, Joe. Absolutely. One-way communication. There is a time and a place for lecture, right? You know, sometimes we'll go and see a speaker like, you know, a Tony Robbins. I would sit and watch him for hours. He could be off camera, never see him, and I could listen to him talk for hours. No problem, right? That would be cool. Let's see. Talking at me, Nicole. Yep, agreed. Reading the slides. Absolutely. Kate, monotonous lecture. Yeah, absolutely. The Ben Stein, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Oh, gosh, I hate it. Pam says facilitator not supporting participant engagement, polls, queries, etc. Excellent. Nicole, eating lunch. Oh, you are eating lunch, so no camera today. Okay, good. But also agree, if you are eating lunch on camera as a facilitator, that's not a good look. Inappropriate clothing on camera. Yep. Not looking at the camera. Fantastic. All right. Thank you very much for that. And I've just lost my, there it is. Okay. So let's move it along. Let's talk about some best practices for virtual facilitation. And again, these are some basic blocking and tackling pieces: lights, camera, action. I will say again that these are fairly well-known things at this point for folks who have been delivering virtually for a little while. But they're worth reiterating. And I'm saying that because I see people still miss on these things all the time. Okay, so I'm going to go through the bullets really quickly. First and foremost, you want to have your camera be at eye level or just slightly above eye level. And I say slightly above because when we're talking about how you actually project your voice, you want your vocal cords to be completely open. So if your camera is just slightly up and you are trying to make that eye contact, right, when you're looking at the camera, it opens up your vocal cords a little bit. And so that kind of plays into the audio piece, but it's an important piece as well. Okay. And again, make sure that you are at least occasionally looking directly into the camera, because that is going to simulate eye contact as if you were in person, right? Moving on to the background and your lighting, make sure that you have a neutral or uncluttered background because it can be distracting. I personally am a big fan of virtual backgrounds. One, I have a really messy area behind me, but two, it allows me for a little bit of branding as well. Always recommend facing the light. Again, if you have a natural light source, that is ideal. If you can get in a place where your camera is right in front of a window, having that sunshine shine in, that is absolutely the best light. But if you don't have access to natural lighting, get a ring light or two. They are exceptionally inexpensive at this point, and they work really, really well. The third bullet point there, and this one is super important. I see it all the time. Don't have lights behind you. It gives you the witness protection look, right? If you're going to be on camera, you want people to be able to see you. They want you to see your face. They want to see your expressions, right? And, you know, quite frankly, and this leads into the fourth bullet or fourth category over there. When you're on camera, you want to be talking with your hands, right? If that's something that you usually do, that accentuates your point. And I'm not going to go super in depth there because I'm going to step on Marc's toes a little bit when we get to his portion. But if you're on camera, make sure that you're well lit. It's important. Okay. Moving on to audio, you want to make sure that you're avoiding any background noise. Now, many of us are working from home. You can't avoid everything, but you can take steps to minimize that as much as possible. Obviously, if you have other folks in the house, let them know that you're going to be doing a meeting. Let them know that, you know, you'd like for it to be quiet in the home. If you have a door to the area that you're going to be presenting from, go ahead and close that. Whenever possible, make sure that you're spending time practicing with your microphone, because not all microphones are created equally. Okay. I personally use a Blue Yeti. I absolutely love it. There are some people who don't like it, but one of the things that I like about it, it has an option to change the direction of where that microphone is facing so that it gets more of your audio. But not, again, not every microphone is created equally. So you want to practice with it, do some recordings, and then listen to how you sound. It's very, very important. Okay. And lastly, make sure that you're speaking slowly and clearly with appropriate pauses throughout. I am guilty of this all the time. my pace gets going really fast, especially if I get excited about a particular topic. And that's something that you have to be aware of. Okay. On to the last category, attitude and energy. Have high energy. When you are facilitating in person, you get that little rush of adrenaline, right? Maybe even some butterflies in your stomach, and you are 100% of your energy when you're doing it in person. But I see it all the time. People step on camera, they're in Zoom, maybe they're forced to sit down. And so energy is a little bit reduced. But the reality is when you're facilitating virtually, you want to come at 125% because only a small portion of your entire body is on camera. And so you need to be able to deliver and for people to be able to feel that energy that you're trying to deliver. If you're not excited and showing excitement about your content, they're not going to be excited about your content. Now, obviously, again, when you're facilitating virtually, you may not have a standing desk. You may not be able to move your camera, but whenever possible, do try to stand up because motion creates emotion. And I'm not saying you want to bounce around on your camera, but by standing up, you're able to activate all of your body language. Okay. Again, I touched on this a moment ago. You're on camera. Make sure that you are using facial expressions, right? You don't want to just be stone-faced the entire time. Smile and use your hand gestures. I'm Italian. I talk with my hands. And if you are not seeing me talk with my hands on screen, I'm not delivering the full message to you. Lastly, from an attitude perspective is be really open to bringing your participants into the discussion. There's a lot of ways to do that using the engagement features within the platform, but you can simply ask them to come off of mute, right? Ask that question and ask people to come in and participate. A few other tips that I'd like to share with you guys. Again, try to eliminate slang, jargon whenever possible, right? Know your audience. If they are familiar with it, okay, not a big deal, but not everyone is going to be familiar with that slang, that jargon, your acronyms. So try to use really simple language when you're delivering your presentation. Always be aware of your tone and pace and make sure that you're using vocal variety, right? You don't want to be, to Kate's point earlier, Ben Stein, right? The teacher from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It's just not engaging. It's really, really boring. Whenever possible, use co-facilitators as well, right? You want to have that pattern interrupt where someone else is coming in and changing what's being shared in and how it's being shared on camera. Be sure to ask questions, both direct as well as overhead. And again, whenever possible, call on your participants to respond. It doesn't always have to be coming off of mute. There's a lot of ways that you can get them to participate. And we're going to talk about some of those as we go throughout the session today. So again, create energy and enthusiasm. Remember to bring 125% of your energy. Smile when you talk. Stand up if you can. And remember, there is occasionally power in silence as well. All right, so let's launch the next polling question, Joey. So when on camera, what should you be focused on? All right, what should you be focused on for your background and lighting? All right, here they come. All right, so we got 7 out of 10 responses. Give that just another moment. All right, Joe, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and ending the poll and bringing it up on screen for us. The answer, obviously, guys, is all of the above, right? You really want to make sure, again, that you have that neutral, uncluttered background, or again, use a virtual background. Make sure that you're facing your light source and be really aware of any light behind you because you don't want to have that witness protection look. Okay, well done. All right, so let's move on to preparation. How can you be proactive around preparation, technology issues, and your time? So class management has has as much to do with how you prepare for your session as what you actually do during your session. So a few recommendations. Review all of your facilitator and participant materials that are going to be used during your delivery beforehand. I personally recommend at least 2 to 3 days prior so that you have chance and opportunity to make those changes and practice with those changes. On that note, Take part in rehearsals with your producer if you have one, and or your co-facilitators. It's super important that everyone's on the same page and knows what levers need to be pulled, how, and when. Again, practice all of your tech features. Take note of any of those technology issues or difficulties, slow transitions, hiccups, and then discuss them with the people that you're going to be facilitating with, again, before the session. Try to eliminate or reduce any and all distractions in your environment beforehand. I highly recommend arriving at least 30 minutes early to your virtual session to do a tech check. And trust me when I say you would much rather have 25 minutes to spare, knowing that everything's ready to go, than have only 5 minutes to showtime and have unaddressed issues that you need to try and work through. It creates a lot of stress for you as the facilitator, and it will come through in your presentation if you don't have your head together. So let's move on to technology issues. Now, these are, some of the more common issues that we see, when you're teaching in a virtual environment, things like poor internet connectivity, video or audio cutting out periodically. Sometimes you have difficulty sharing the presentation or your features not launching properly. Maybe it's even that your participants aren't able to join or fully participate in the session. Those are all things that will occasionally happen. Now, they are becoming more and more rare, right? Early COVID, we saw all types of issues, but people have gotten a little bit more savvy. The technology in of itself has gotten a little bit better. And the reality is at this point, most of these challenges can and will be handled by the host or producer. Okay. And that's, honestly, troubleshooting 101 when you're talking about virtual facilitation and Zoom, oftentimes is just log out and back in. And a lot of times that resolves the issue. Okay. Now, I do want you to keep in mind that it's really important to have contingency plans. For example, be prepared to switch to phone audio, okay, especially if you are noticing low internet bandwidth. Also, you want to be sure that your co-facilitator or your producer has a copy of your deck that they can share on your behalf if you do run into technology issues, right? Again, that low bandwidth. When you're sharing your screen, sometimes video and audio, you have all of those things happen, and that kind of sucks. But if your connection is sketchy, you can change to phone audio or have someone else share the deck, and that reduces the amount of internet bandwidth that you're using. Okay. And that allows you then to have a crisper video, crisper audio, and it, again, can help with that internet bandwidth. It's also very important, of course, to be relaxed if you do run into any of those issues. In most cases, the participants will have no idea that there were any problems unless you yourself identify it as an issue. All right, so let's move on to time. And I do see some chats coming in, so I'm going to circle back here in a second, pause, and we'll cover some of those. From a timing perspective, be sure that you start and end your session on time. And if you can end a few minutes early, everybody loves to get a few minutes back in their day, right? But the key part there is if you respect your participants' time, they are more likely to focus on you, the learning, and engaging with you, not looking at the clock to be prepared for their next meeting, which inevitably they are going to have to ultimately run to. Be sure that you're referring to your agenda if you have one for any suggested timings. You can be flexible, of course, with your agenda because you do want to encourage participation. And sometimes those discussions are really, really worth having depending on your content. But again, you want to stay close to the timeframes that you have identified in your agenda so that you don't ultimately run over by going down rabbit holes. Always recommend trying to be more brief than going and expanding too much because, again, those rabbit holes, once you go down them, sometimes it's really hard to get back out. And avoid adding too much of your own content to pre-prepared presentations, unless, of course, you're directed to do so by the instructional designer or someone there in the session who has the ability to tell you to do so. Unless, of course, you really feel it's going to add a lot of value to your participants' experience. Always highly recommend referring your participants to refer to any materials that you have provided for them above and beyond any details that you're sharing in the delivery of the course, especially if they are ultimately questions that could derail the delivery and, again, take you down that rabbit hole. Highly recommend having a timer on your phone or using your computer, right? Just having a little timer slide somewhere off to the side that you can reference. Virtual courses typically that are going to run less than 2 hours don't have scheduled breaks. But if you do have a scheduled break, share a timer on screen so that everybody knows when to be back, right? They're on the same page for that timing. Also do highly recommend that if you have a lot of content to address throughout the course of your presentation, be sure to control your participants' interactions by encouraging them to put those questions into chat, or if it's a webinar, using that Q&A feature as kind of a parking lot, so that, again, you can keep your presentation really concise and then circle back to those questions. So I'm going to pause for a moment and stop sharing so that we can see each other for a moment and talk a little bit about some of the stuff that I'm seeing coming in through the chat. All right. There we go. Okay, so Bruce says focus on looking into the camera and can get tiring. Yes, it absolutely can get tiring. And I'm not, of course, saying that you have to look at the camera the entire time, but again, it does simulate the eye contact. So occasionally you want to circle back and look at that camera, because again, eye contact is engaging, especially if you're talking about in person. That's a way that you can simulate it virtually. You put a sign on your door on camera, also very, very good. I actually went on Amazon and I purchased one of those on-air signs, and it lights up, and I have it right above my door so that people know when I'm on camera or on an event. Shakina says low confidence rating was specifically for facilitating a virtual course. So you use Zoom for facilitating meetings, networking, and coaching sections frequently. And honestly, a lot of these best practices apply to all of those situations, right? I do a ton of networking, and I can't tell you how many people end up on camera or not on camera at all. And they look terrible. They sound terrible. It really creates a very bad first impression, and they look like they're unprepared to have that meeting with me, right? That's unprofessional. Noel, all of the above. Yeah. Bruce, I like to have a second computer or my tablet. Absolutely. That's a fantastic idea. Again, in case you run into any issues, having that alternative to go to and or to see what your participants are seeing is a fantastic way to verify that everything is working properly for the people that are there for you. Joe seconds that motion. And Bruce says for timing, practice using Picha Kucha. Come off mute for a second, Bruce. I want to know more.
Well, that's how I have an introductory slide deck if I'm joining a new team as a consultant, and it's 20 slides and 20 seconds per slide. So you're limited to what you can say per slide, and it gives you a lot of practice in timing, because if you start going long on something and then the slide automatically advances after 20 seconds, you have to finish your sentence and move on. Of course, if you forget to say something, the audience doesn't know that, but you have to be kept to your 20 seconds per slide.
Nice. That's a really good tool. Awesome. Thank you for that tip. I'll also throw in the mix there. One of the facilitators that I work with very, very regularly uses a program called Session Lab. And basically what it allows you to do is create a full-timed agenda for your event. Really, really cool tool. Highly recommend checking it out as well if you're doing a lot of virtual facilitation. All right. Anyone want to share any other best practices or thoughts around preparation, technology issues, or timing for virtual training? Oh, all right. So let me pull my deck back up. And I want to share a quick clip with you, mostly because I think it's funny, but I've seen this stuff happen. And if you've seen this one before, just go ahead and laugh with me.
Mr. Ponton, I believe you have a filter turned on in the video settings. You might want to take
we're
a
trying to, can you hear me, Judge?
I can hear you.
Oh, darn it.
I think it's a filter.
It is, and I don't know how to remove it. I've got my assistant here. She's trying to, but I'm prepared to go forward with it. I'm here live. I'm not a cat.
I can see that. I think if you click the up arrow next to this.
I don't know about you guys, like the guy in the cat, you know, that part's funny, but what's funnier to me is Jerry up in the top right hand corner. He's totally not paying attention. And as soon as he says, "I'm not a cat," he looks up and he just has that little grin. I've seen that video 100 times, but it cracks me up every single time. So why do I share that clip? I mean, yes, it's funny, but the point there is that you don't want to be that guy. You need to be really careful about using features that you aren't familiar with. And or letting your kids play with your Zoom account. I've talked to a lot of folks that do that, and all of a sudden you show up on camera with a mustache like mine and you don't actually have one. That can be a little bit embarrassing. You show up as a cat or a hippopotamus, not really playing well to your professionalism, right? So again, be aware of the tool and how it's used, and try to avoid using for the very first time any features that you haven't practiced with in a live session. Okay. All right. So let's move it along. We're going to talk now a bit about the doing and being of virtual facilitation. And so I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Mark and let him dive in.
Thanks, Bernie. I appreciate it. Great tips. And I'm going to do a little bit more of a deep dive on what you started to talk about presence. So one thing as you draft and prepare your presentation is your why. Why are you doing this presentation? Next slide, please. Maybe management asked you to do it or a client did, but what's the larger why? What are your goals with it for your participants? What value do you believe you're offering others? What do you see manifesting in the future for yourself as you become a more proficient speaker? Having a strong why can make the difference between a ho-hum presentation and one where your impact is off the charts. Do you firmly believe in what you're presenting? Are your values shining through in a way that's engaging and inspiring to your audience? For example, can they see the dedication and commitment you've invested in creating an amazing workshop experience for them? Do they get to experience your creativity and innovation in the way you interact and show up with them? Spark wonder with your why. That being said, I want to know if there's an audience member that will be open to talking a little bit about their presentation and their why for a few moments. Can I have a volunteer? Okay.
I can volunteer. I teach continuing ed for nurses and social workers, and I have sat through a very boring, implicit bias 2-hour session that didn't make a dent in my practice. And coming through COVID in Detroit in ICUs, I wanted to make a dent in implicit bias. So when I had the opportunity to create a CE course, my why is that what I present actually makes a difference in the practice of these healthcare professionals in our area.
What are some of the challenges you've experienced while you're trying to find that why?
Yeah, there are many systemic factors involved in healthcare as to why it continues to negatively impact people. And we can see it throughout the entire assessment and plan in all of healthcare areas. So if we bake it into every single step of the way, we can actually press back on it.
Hmm. And what's your ideal outcome from the presentations you do?
My ideal outcome in the last half, I teach a mnemonic so that as they're practicing on the floor, in the unit, in their settings, they can remember, if I stop here, I can use those steps to actually push back on implicit bias, negative outcomes coming through my care.
So some of what's coming up for me right now is you're obviously very passionate about what you're speaking about. You're dedicated. There's a little bit of frustration that what you want to manifest isn't always happening. What's one thing you could do for yourself to kind of honor those values into your why more powerfully in your presentation?
Yeah, boy, I make sure that I share why it's important for me to create and bring this course to people. And I share real stories of why it impacts our care. So I'm able to see the connection with people. We open it frequently for discussion so that people can share why it's important for them to actually take home these ideas and put them into practice.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joey. If you could take us off the spotlight. So that's a little bit about why, and you saw a quick example of why having a why is important and how values kind of play into that. Next slide, please. So voting on that are the nonverbals that show up when we present. And again, Bernie touched on this a little bit in terms of your energy, your presence. And I believe it's important that you're aware of them. You may have heard that what we communicate isn't just about what we say, it's how we say it and how we're moving our bodies when we say it. Bernie mentioned, he's Italian. I'm Italian too. So I do talk a little bit. I'm half Italian, so I half move my hands. But I understand what he's saying. It's just like we have an expression, we have something we're passionate about. Kate mentioned something. I'm sure when she's talking, she might be using her hands or emoting in different ways. Albert Mehrabian, a researcher of body language, first broke down the components of a face-to-face conversation and found that communication is 55% nonverbal, 38% vocal, and 7% words only. So think about that for a moment. As you're hearing my words and looking at my video as I speak, a pretty small amount of your experience of me relates to my words, at least according to Albert's research. I guess it's a good thing I did some vocal exercises before Bernie's presentation today. So keeping that in mind, in the chat or off mute, share one word that describes what you believe is important to keep an eye out for in your virtual audience while you're presenting.
It's them looking like they're engaged and excited to be there.
Right? What else comes up for folks? Eye contact. I'm seeing engagement, interacting, chat engagement, connection. Kind of to Bernie's point, if I'm talking to you directly in the camera, and again, it doesn't have to be 100%, but you can tell that I'm passionate, hopefully, about this topic, and I want to connect with each of you. I usually have a priming exercise I do right before a presentation. I'll go out, maybe take a walk. Actually, I took a walk before today's presentation to kind of get jazzed up and get some testosterone going, some endorphins going. That's one way that I get jazzed up. Maybe one thing to reflect for yourself is what can you do to kind of get primed before your presentation? So that's great. Thanks for sharing. Joey, if you wouldn't mind bringing up the next part of the slide. So this word cloud, here's a list of communications that are nonverbal that I'd like to cover. Just double click on a few of these for a moment. The head tilt and duck. Head tilting, say that 3 times real fast, is a signal that someone is interested and involved. But when people are listening to a message that makes them feel uncomfortable, their heads may pull back from whomever they are talking to in an attempt to create distance. In a business context, the head duck is a signal that often reveals extreme discomfort or an extreme difference in the status and relationship between individuals. Another one that comes up for me that resonates is the head nod. It's tremendously important in communication. When someone nods slowly, it usually indicates an ongoing interest in whoever is speaking. Fast nodding signals impatience with the speaker or the listener's desire to get a turn to speak. I've watched a few interviews on YouTube, for example, and I saw the interviewer nodding his head quickly as though the guest is taking too long to articulate their answers. And for me, it was a bit of a turnoff and a little bit rude. So that's what came up for me. Maybe consider as I go through these, what's coming up for you as I describe them. Facial touching. How many times do we touch our faces throughout the day? I think it's an obscene amount based on some studies. Under stress, people self-soothe in a variety of ways. Women twirl their hair and men stroke their beards for psychological comfort is one example. To get the fastest relief from even mildly stressful situations, we touch our faces, our chin, our lips, our cheek, where a calming effect is most easily accessed. I'll just touch on one more. Raised eyebrows. When someone is unsure of whether he or she is believed or how an action is or is accepted, you will commonly see the eyebrows raise and pause, even if momentarily. And I thought this was interesting. This gesture of raising the eyebrows slowly over a few seconds, along with a tilted head, usually comes at the end of a sentence as a nonverbal inquiry to see if the listener has understood. So did any of these jump out to anyone in the audience, or any comments you'd like to add in the chat about them? Maybe some experiences you've had with any of these that come up. That's a great point, Pamela. Thank you for sharing that. And there's these things called mirror neurons, where we kind of, it's the same, I believe it's similar to when we sneeze, then other people will sneeze or yawn. It's kind of interesting. I mean, we have a joke in our family about that, just like, okay, you made me yawn, Eric, thanks. So Noel, can you just briefly come off of mute and mention RBF? I'm afraid I'm not. Oh wait, I do know what that means. I get you. I've been told that I have resting thinking face, and it took me a while to break out of that. So I get that reference. Thank you. So in terms of mandating people, I think, people come to presentations that might be voluntold, or they might volunteer to come because they want to attend, like a presentation like this. We didn't force any of you to come. You were engaged by the topic, maybe Bernie as a speaker or myself. And I know we've asked you to have your cameras on. That's in service of trying to have you have the most engaging, positive experience possible. Not saying it's 100% always that way, but it's encouraged. From my world, it's encouraged, because again, it increases the interaction and engagement community that Bernie touched on earlier. So finally, let me summarize and touch on a few other techniques to consider. Again, pay attention to folks' facial expressions on those on the screen. Observe their gestures and their posture. Listen to the vocal cues. Bernie mentioned the monotone voice, Bueller, look out for emoting that or not emoting that. Ask clarifying questions. That's a powerful technique in presenting, and it's a powerful technique in coaching. Give feedback and encouragement. That was a great point, Sarah. I hadn't thought about it that way. Bernie said something like that earlier when one of you shared a technique. And then finally, be mindful of your own body language, because these nonverbal signals give great insight into our emotional state. Communication suffers without them. If you don't use head movements and facial expressions, people may not want to engage with you as much as you'd like during your presentation or even in daily conversation. Next slide, please. And then finally, let's just touch on a little bit more of the being and doing. One thing to consider as you prepare for a presentation is your mind state. Bernie's been discussing some great things to do, and I'd like to offer a few more thoughts and tools on regulating your state of being, and maybe a few doing things as well to round this section out. For example, how's your confidence? What might be standing in your way of feeling more confident? Do you have some thoughts about not being prepared enough, not having enough information for a comprehensive presentation? Or are you upset over something that happened the morning of your presentation? How many of you can relate to any of these? We all have things called saboteurs that cause us to judge ourselves, others, and our circumstances. They've been with us our whole life. They helped us to survive, and they show up in our presentation self-speak. Be aware of that awareness as being the first step. Quick aside, if you'd like to take a free assessment to find out about your particular flavor of saboteur, you can go to the link that Joey's going to post in the chat and take a quick 5 to 10 minute assessment to see what your top saboteur accomplices are. There are 9 in positive intelligence. That's the practice or content I'm pulling from. That awareness alone can provide some valuable insights going forward in terms of how you show up during presentations and even in the larger context of your life. And then in terms of doing, how might you disrupt some of the judging or negative thinking I discussed a moment ago? Are there things that you typically do to calm yourself? Feel free to type in the chat. Moving your body is a great one. It helps you change your state physiologically. Do you like to take walks? Do you exercise or stretch? These are all great ways to help manage your state prior to presenting. So just in the chat, if you wouldn't mind just doing some quick things that you like to do before presentations. One thing I like to do is not drink caffeine or try and get a good night's sleep when possible. It's not always possible. I have sleep apnea, so that's a little bit of a challenge for me, but I try and take naps, etc. Meditate. See that one's deep breaths. There's something called box breaths. You can do, I believe it's for 7 seconds breathing in, 7 seconds hold, 7 seconds breathing out. My son, who has anxiety issues sometimes, he uses box breaths to help calm him. And there's a number of different breathing methods. Wim Hof is just one thing I'll mention. That's a great tool. If you want to look that up, I think his first name is WYM in terms of breathing techniques. You can do that. Dancing is great. I do Latin dancing as a hobby, and that's a great way to kind of help with that. I see that someone is trained in positive intelligence as well, PQ reps, Shakina. All great examples. Thank you, everyone, for sharing those. You can hyper-focus using different mindfulness techniques. One method is a practice, again, in positive intelligence. If you want to try this now, is to rub your thumb and index finger with such intention that you can feel the ridges of your fingerprints between them for 10 to 20 seconds. This is an example of a mini meditation you can do to help calm yourself. You really hyper-focus on what you're doing. Or you can hyper-focus on a picture or an object in front of you or perhaps outside the window for 20 seconds and really see the detail, the color, the impact that visual has on you. It's a way to refocus and reframe your thinking and mindset. In fact, you can use these techniques with any of your 5 senses. You can make them up on the fly. In some ways, they're more powerful than regular meditation as a way to calm yourself. If you do these mini meditations a handful of times a day at least, you should start to notice a difference on you as you get closer to and ultimately give your next speaking engagement. And then consider some of these other techniques to help you stay in the sage mode to optimize how you show up during your presentations. Journaling as you're creating your presentation to capture some ahas. A gratitude list every day. I do a gratitude list every morning of things that I appreciate that happened to me the day before and then projected into the future. One of which might be, I'm going to have an awesome presentation. I'm going to kick butt. I'm going to love these people. I'm going to make an impact. Masterminding with others, meaning you get together at least somewhat regularly with a trusted community to brainstorm ideas and get critical feedback on your presentations. And then finally, mind mapping. There are numerous hard copy and applications you can use to take your ideas and flesh them out using this tool, which invites more calm when you have the depth and breadth of your content fleshed out using a tool that utilizes the right and left sides of your brain. Even one of these being or doing techniques can help you prepare to give your next amazing presentation. Any other comments or questions on what I covered on this slide, the being and doing?
Oh, Mark, Joe popped a question into the chat. I think is a good one.
Any tips for people who are so comfortable and calm that they need to work up energy and be vibrant? So I think that's a great tip or great question. Typically when I get, like, even for example, this presentation, because I was presenting with Bernie, again, I think that changing your state, like moving around, moving your body is a great way to do that. Talking to a friend, someone who maybe has a good sense of humor. I mean, these are pretty much, not, like groundbreaking ideas, but think about really what activates you, what excites you. Maybe it's the content to what Kate talked about earlier. Think of all the people that you're going to affect by showing up powerfully and being of service to these people. There's a mantra that I say to myself, and I said it before today's presentation. It's when I'm of service, I know exactly what to say. When I'm of service, I know exactly what to do. So if you use these kind of mantras, I think that kind of leans into your question, Joe, a little bit. But changing your state through physical movement is definitely a big one for me.
Yeah, I second that. Joe, for me personally, it may sound a little bit silly, but I like to power move or power pose, if you've ever heard of that, right? So, you take a second, like mine is, I'm not going to stand up and do it, but it's just doing one of these a couple of times. Yes, right. And I feel good, like as if I just hit a home run in baseball. Yes. And that, creates a little bit of that energy internally for me. At the beginning of our session today, I had music that pumped me up personally, like Stevie Wonder, Superstition. That is my jam. Like when I hear that song, I know it's time to turn it on. So those are definitely some things that you can do as well. You know, and honestly, it's just kind of the reciprocal of the people who maybe get really nervous before events, right? So if you are, you know, to Mark's point earlier, maybe you do a meditation. If you're nervous, you want to do something that is going to create energy for you when, you know, you are that super calm individual. A lot of folks will say do like 10 jumping jacks before you jump on, because you are activating your entire body. And again, that motion creates emotion. Bruce, disco. Love it. Shining star,
very low.
Mickey. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Any other comments, questions for Mark before we move on to the next portion? All right. Let me go ahead and bring the deck back up.
Thank you, Bernie.
You are very welcome. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit now about leveraging the virtual platform. Well, let's just dive in. So let's go ahead and launch a polling question, Joey. So what is your confidence in using the virtual platform features to engage your audience? And we're going to talk about what all of those things are if you're not familiar, but things like your polling questions, your breakout rooms, chat prompts, things of that nature. What is your comfort level in leveraging those tools in Zoom or the virtual world? We got 100% participation really, really fast. That's awesome. All right, go ahead and share that, Joey. So most of you are either of moderate or high confidence, and that's fantastic, right? Here's the reason that I ask that. You really need to do something every 3 to 7 minutes when you are facilitating virtually. I mentioned earlier that I am one of those individuals who works from multiple monitors. Well, if I have Zoom on one of those 7 monitors, guess what I have going on the other 6? I have email, I have Teams, I have LinkedIn, I have Slack, I have maybe Facebook. I might even be watching a baseball game on one of my monitors, okay? So every 3 to 7 minutes, 10 really at the outset, you need to have them do something. Cat videos, yes, Bruce. You have to have them do something to re-engage with the platform, because the reality is it only takes one email that they turn and look at to draw them away from the virtual platform, right? It only takes one message from somebody that they want to hear from on LinkedIn to make them no longer engage and participate with what you're doing there in the Zoom. So every 3 to 7 minutes, again, 10 at the outset, you want to have them do something to re-engage. And again, that could be something as simple as having asking an overhead question and having 1 or 2 people come off of mute. Just having someone else do the talking for a second, that's a pattern interrupt that will draw people back in, okay? Having them do something in chat, that is a pattern interrupt that will bring them back to the platform, okay? So let's talk a little bit about what are all of the engagement features that are available within Zoom, okay? So we have things like breakout rooms. Most of us are pretty familiar with how those operate at this point, but again, it gives a different look to the presentation, allowing your participants to interact with each other, which again is a different experience than just looking at you when you are on screen and presenting. We've done several polling questions throughout the course of today. Great opportunity to do a knowledge check, right? If you've just taught them something that you want them to pick up, do a polling question to verify that they have picked up what you were laying down, okay? I mentioned chat prompts, and we've done that quite a few times. Just getting them to type something in the chat draws them back into the platform. You may or may not believe it, but screen sharing is actually an engagement feature, right? You may be on screen, right, in gallery mode the entire time. And if you are not using your screen share regularly, just simply bringing something up on screen for a moment and then taking it back down, again, changes their perspective and it draws them back into the platform. Video and audio is obviously super important, guys. Just simply being on camera as a facilitator is engaging. I can't tell you how many folks I have seen deliver hour or even multi-hour presentations and not once come on camera. It is so disengaging. Okay. I personally am not a huge fan of whiteboards within Zoom, but I do like the annotation feature, and they operate similarly, right? A whiteboard is just a big white screen that everybody can write on. However, annotation is when you have a slide on screen and it allows them to put check marks or write or circle something. That is a really great engagement feature as well. Raising of hands, right? Occasionally you can ask a question where they respond by simply raising their hand or not. Okay. And then of course, reactions. Guys, we are in the social media age. Everybody uses emojis on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on all of the platforms. It is super common. Don't be afraid to leverage those. Okay. And lastly, recording. Now, recording is actually, in my opinion, a disengagement feature, because a lot of folks, if they are being recorded, they are less likely to participate. So if you don't have to record it or you're not using it for future purposes, don't record, because again, it encourages that much more honesty and people will participate a bit more, right? They don't feel like they, if they say something wrong, that it's going to get out to the universe. Okay. So I'm going to pause for a second. So Pam, can you speak more to why you don't like the whiteboard? It is aligned with meeting training purpose. So the reason I don't like whiteboards myself personally, Pam, is a whiteboard is oftentimes just the whiteboard on screen. There's no instruction. There's nothing really to tell participants what to do. Yes, you can verbally instruct them, but some people may miss the instruction and then all of a sudden they don't know what to do. Whereas if you're using annotation, it ultimately serves the same function, but you can do it with a slide where you have some instruction on screen with what you want them to do. That is really the only reason I don't like the whiteboard feature itself, but I do like the activity of whiteboarding, and I do that through annotation, right, with a slide. Oh, Mickey had to run. We'll get her the recording. And then Shakina says, I know the 3 to 7 minute engagement tip is more for virtual presentations and training. Is there a standard for in-person presentations? I would say it's about the same. You want to get them to do something every 10 minutes or less or so, right? Because again, they may just go into la la land. They start daydreaming a little bit, right? And so you want to bring them back into the conversation in some way, shape, or form. Great question. All right, so let's talk for a moment about some other features that you could potentially use that are not specific to Zoom. Because again, let's be honest, there are a lot of platforms out there aside from Zoom. There's Teams, there's Adobe Connect, there's WebEx. I actually was just recently introduced to a new platform called Mingle, which is kind of cool. They're still working on the development of it, so there's not a lot of engagement features within it, but you can leverage some outside applications to duplicate what you might use the Zoom features for. So there's things like Mentimeter, which is kind of similar to Poll Everywhere as well. It allows you to make word clouds and ask survey style questions, do polls. And it really is a cool tool that is separate and different from the standard type poll that you would use in Zoom. Again, pattern interrupt. If you're doing the same things over and over again, it starts to lose its intensity. So you want to use something else, use one of these tools to do the same thing as a poll within Zoom, but just a little bit different format. I love Kahoot. Kahoot is a really, really fun tool to gamify your presentations a bit, almost a game show style presentation. Really, really cool. Miro and Mural are also really cool tools that you can use to get people to engage and move things around on screen and participate visually and actively with you during the presentation. And Shakina, yes, I will absolutely share the deck as well. Yep, absolutely. So I'm going to pause for a second and take us out of screen share, bring us back to gallery mode for a moment. What other tools or features or tips do you guys have for either leveraging these tools within Zoom or just to create additional engagement in your virtual training programs?
I use shared office applications, like sharing a OneNote notebook. Because I teach a software testing class in the evenings. So I actually have the shared OneNote notebook. You can set up tabs for the different like breakout groups, or say, hey, go to page 3 and here's the information we're going to talk about today. Add your comments.
Great. Absolutely. Very good.
I just used a tool that was new to me called FigJam. It's kind of similar to Miro. Mural, it's a whiteboard that can be set up in advance, and then while you're using it, whoever's running it can make things that were hidden show up. So to your point about having an activity with the instructions, it's all there. There's a space. Get people looking at it, find the space. Okay, now the instructions pop up. So I used it for icebreakers. Like it did like some would you rather questions and just had you stamp in the boxes as a starting point and then take you off in groups all on one big whiteboard.
Nice.
But groups of 4 could work on the same whiteboard. So it was really interesting.
Nice. That's a cool tool. I'm gonna have to check that out.
Yeah.
Would you mind, do you have access to the link? Would you mind dropping that in the chat?
Sure.
Awesome.
I will drop that in. The other one I wanted to mention, just to your point about the recording, I found one advantage of Teams or Zoom, the virtual webinar, that you don't have in person is the breakout rooms. Getting people into breakout rooms where they know nobody can overhear them. And they open up and talk a lot more than even in person sometimes.
Nice. That's absolutely true.
Yep. Thanks, Bruce.
Yeah. Thank you, Bruce, for dropping that in. Appreciate it. No, I couldn't agree with you more, Joe. I absolutely love using breakout rooms, for a variety of purposes. Obviously, they can have those private discussions. Sometimes it's brainstorming or working on group projects together. But one of the things is that in the main room of Zoom, you may be recording the event, but unless somebody very specifically pushes record in that breakout room, it does not get recorded with the main event. And that is obviously very valuable. And Bruce says breakout rooms are much easier to use these days. Participants understand them now. Yeah, that's absolutely true as well. And there's actually some really cool features in Zoom about how you can set up the breakout rooms too. Like you can do a polling question, and then based on polling question responses, they get parsed out into the breakout rooms based on their responses. Really, really cool feature. So highly recommend checking that out if you haven't seen it yet. Won't go into it obviously today just for the sake of time, but definitely recommend researching it. All right, let me pull back up the deck, and we are getting close to landing this plane, folks. All right, so we are going to take a few moments for Q&A. Obviously, you guys have been participating. You've asked some questions throughout, but I'm curious, what is your lesson learned for today? What is maybe one new best practice or tip that you'll use going forward in your next virtual delivery or presentation? Feel free to come off mute if you'd like to speak verbally, or drop it into the chat. All right, so Joe says, double check that I built in some form of activity every 3 to 7 minutes. Very good. I have a list of tools and calming practices to investigate, Bruce. Yep, absolutely. Timing of an activity to change and re-engage folks is Pam. Awesome. Kate, same. Timing of activities. Love it. So it seems like that 3 to 7 minutes is definitely a game changer for people. Very good. Shakina, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, definitely. I chimed in on the 3 to 7 minutes, whether it's virtual or in person. So that was a game changer for me. I also like the Zoom using the polling. So I'm going to do that research to have the poll be the thing the trigger to get them into the various breakout rooms. It
really is a cool feature. Highly, highly recommend it. Absolutely. All right, so let's go ahead and land the plane. Here's the wrap up. I'm going to keep it really brief, and I'll give Mark an opportunity to kind of re-summarize some of the things he talked about as well. For me, really, the 3 main points are be prepared and be proactive. How you show up absolutely matters. You have to be professional on camera. So have yourself framed appropriately. Make sure that you have good audio, because people will put up with bad video. They will not put up with bad audio. Okay. And lastly, which everyone seemed to have taken this away, use some type of engagement feature every 3 to 7 minutes to keep people engaged in the platform and thus your presentation. So Mark, over to you briefly for our wrap up.
Thanks, Marie. So basically just going back to that why, what is your motivation? Why are you doing that presentation? And what are your values, your needs, even your boundaries when you're creating these things and you're dealing with management and creating something you're passionate about? And then what are you communicating? Remembering the nonverbals that are showing up. Remember that percentage of 38% vocal, 7% words, 55% nonverbal. And then finally, the being and doing. Are you doing things to take care of yourself internally so that that conversation internally shows up powerfully externally? Back to you, Bernie.
Yeah. And you know, it's funny, Mark, because whenever I hear about the Moravian model, right, the words, tone, and physiology or body language, I always think, for whatever reason, it pops into my head of two people arguing in a different language that I don't understand, right? Like two people arguing in German, and maybe German isn't the right example because they kind of always sound angry, at least to my ears. But you know, you can see how they're communicating. You see their body language. You can hear their tone, but you don't understand the words that they're saying. Does that still mean you're getting 93% of what they're communicating? Well, no, not necessarily. You can get an idea of how that conversation might be going, but the words, while they may only represent 7%, those words are a very important 7% because that's the means of which we're communicating our message, right? So something to think about, something I think about anyway. Maybe that's weird, but that's just me. Okay. So it wouldn't be a free workshop without a couple of offers. Really simply, for me, I'm actually putting together a 12-week masterclass that I'm referring to currently as Audience Alchemy. So it's how you can engage and create really cool, engaging training for your participants. And Mark, I know that you are doing a free 30-minute coaching session around mindset and presentation prep. So if you are if you are interested in either of those two offers or just want to have a chat with us to dive a little bit deeper, please feel free to schedule some time with us. Joey just dropped all of our links into the chat. Obviously, we would love to hear from all of you. So with that, I will go ahead and take down the screen share. You guys have any additional questions, comments, things you want to talk about, or angry outbursts even, love to hear them. Thank you, Pam. Appreciate the feedback.
Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic presentation and really well-rounded with both of you facilitating. Thank you for the content.
Thank you, Kate. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks.
I agree with Kate. I thought it was amazing and very holistic. I love that. I know I've worked with Mark and continue to work with him. He's amazing. So to see all of it put together was great for me. Although I know we were only asked to share one thing, I'm taking away about 6 actions that I plan to implement. So thank you. Great
Awesome.
session.
You're very welcome, Shakina. All right. Well, if there are no other comments, questions, or angry outbursts, that concludes our session today. I hope you all enjoy the day and look forward to seeing you at our next event. Keep your eyes on LinkedIn.